Well, we start the third parak of Subas Bezer Hashem, Parak Elu Nairis here on Chavtes Hamid Aleph, and we're going to talk about Onus Umafata, and these are two parashas in the Torah, and the Onus and the Mafata both are chayiv to pay a knas, and the Mishnah says Elu Nairis sheyesh lahem knas. Later on, we'll have another Mishnah of Elu Nairis she'ein lahem knas. Now, we're talking, according to Rashi, here about ones, and there's a long discussion why Rashi limits this Mishnah to ones. The Mishnah doesn't say ones, and why Rashi excludes mefata. And knas here in this context refers to 50 shkoli kesef. And that's what the Torah requires as a knas. And the chiddush of our Mishnah is that even in a case where the Nara would generate a chiyuv for a serious violation, in other words, it's not just that she's a pnuya that he could have married, but that she's asura olav, and that could mean with an isa lav, it could mean with an isa kares. It could be, and we'll see that in the next Mishnah with regard to a chiyuv mises bezdin. And the Mishnah starts with habal mamzeres, which is the case of a woman, a nara, who was born to an iser erva sheyesh bakares. She was the product of that relationship, and she comes under chayve lav. So even though he'll be chayv malchus, let's say, in a case where he had Edom and Asra, nevertheless, he still pays the knas. The Gemara is going to have to derive that. And we'll see in a minute, Messina and Kusis, they are all included on the Chayve Lavin. But at the end of this Mishnah, we're going to talk about a Baal Achosa. Now, in the case of Achosa, we're talking about a Chiyuv Karetz. So then the question is going to be, why don't we apply a principle called Gimlev the Rabbi Vinay that would knock off the Chiv Mamon, because we know we have a principle called Eno Loke Umishale, or Eno Mace Umishale. Let's talk about Nesina. Nesina is a woman who was born to Givon. The Givonim were from the Chivi, one of the seven nations that occupied Palestine at that time. And they came to Yoshua, and they dressed up in a guise, fooling him, as it were, that they are not from Chivi, that they came from a far-off land. And it got to the point where Bnei Yisrael took a shvua that they wouldn't destroy them. And what happened was, when they found out, the Jewish people found out that they had been duped by the Givonim, who are also called Nesinim in the Lashon of Mishnah, then Yoshua made them into Chotvei Eitzim and Shoavei Mayim. And later on, at a period of time during David HaMelech's period, a Gzera was instituted in which they would be completely prohibited from Kahal Yisrael for all generations. They would not be allowed to enter into Klal Yisrael. Okay, the ala Kusis. Okay, who's a Kusis? This is a country called Kusa, and there's also an area in Bavel where there were Kusim, and these were tribes that were sent into exile by the king of Ashur, and they settled in Shomron in Eretz Yisrael. They underwent Gerus, and it was not a reliable Gerus. They were not really Mekabel mitzvahs by being motivated to be part of the Jewish people. They were motivated by what's called Hachad Arayos, here are the lions that would attack them. And they have the status of Nochrim, of non-Jews, and therefore we're not allowed to marry them. Now the question is, why are you chayiv knas in this case? So we'll have to leave that question for the time being until we get to the Sugyas HaGemara. Okay, now we move on to a second group of naros, which generate knas as well in the case of ones. Now the Torah says that an ones is only chayiv in a case of a besula. She's got to be a nara, and she has to be a besula. And then he'll be chayiv 50 shekel. Now, a girl who converts from another religion, converts to Judaism, is considered a ba'ula. However, if her conversion took place before the ripe old age of 3 years old, then we have a principle called besulei chozrim, and she still retains the status of a besula. So in these three cases, whether it's a giores who's, let's say, her mother brought her in for gerus, and she's less than 3 years old, a shvuya or a shivcha. Now, shvuya really refers to a bas Yisrael, and normally she's a ba'ula, but now she's less than 3 years old, so she still retains her status as a basula, and hence generates the knas of ma'anis. And then finally, in the case of a shivcha, her status is such that she becomes a giores at the time of shichrur, and if her shichrur took place before she was 3 years old, then she retains her status as a besula. Now we get to a third group, and these are arayos, not chayvei lavim, like we saw by Mamzer, Nesina, and Kusis, but rather we're talking about chayvei krisos, habal achoso, alachos aviv, alachos imo, alachos ishto, alachos achiv. All the above are chayvei krisos. Now it's interesting because Eishes Achiv in the Mishnah is an Eishes Ish, and that would incur Achiv Misa, and there's no knas in the case of a violation of Achiv Misa. But the answer is this is after Gerushin. So she's no longer an Eishes Ish, but she's Asur Mishum Eishes Achiv. Now in the note here, he points out that lo medubar bi achiv shenesa'a v'achkach girsha. In other words, if she had a din of a nesua, then she's no longer besula. So it couldn't be that we're talking about a case of a nesua. So you would have to say that it was Eishes Achiv, and his brother divorced her during Erusin, before Nesuin. And in such a case, again, she's an Erev with a Chiv Kares. There's no Chiv Misa in this case of Eishes Achiv, but there's no Eishes Ish because he divorced her. She's still a B'sula because it was a Gerushin Mina Erusin before Nesuin. And then we have the same approach in the next case, which is Eishes Achi Aviv and Ala Nida. In all the above cases, Yesh Lem Knas Afal Pi Shehem Bi Kares. So there's a Chiv Kares in a case of Mezid. If there was Asra, then we give Malchus. If there was no Asra, then the Chiv Kares will which is a punishment b'dei shamayim, that will be the appropriate punishment for any of the above violations of erev. On the other hand, the ones is not potter from tashlumin chamishim shekel kesef, and we do not apply the principle of kimle b'derabimine she'em b'hem misas bezdin. Now, kimle b'derabimine will apply only for someone who's chayav misa b'dei bezdin. But kares is a chiv b'dei shamayim, and therefore doesn't push off or neutralize the chiyuv knas of onis. So now the Gemara is medayik in the Mishnah. Hani naros psulos islu knas ksheros lo. Is the Mishnah telling me? It's very strange. The Mishnah says elu naros sheichem knas, and then it goes ahead and lists the psulos. What about a woman who's not a psula? Hachi kama. The Gemara answers elu naros psulos sheichem knas. In other words, amongst the list of naros psulos, which means asuros, this is the list of those who generate a knas. And later on, we'll have a list of asuros that do not generate it. Now the Gemara is medayik again. Naira in ktana lo. Why does the Mishnah start with elu naros, implying that only during naros, which means she reached the age of 12, which stays naros, and for the next 6 months she's in a state of naros until she becomes a bogeres at the age of 12 and 6 months. From the fact that the Mishnah singles out nara, it means the exclusion of number one, a bogeres, and number two, of a ketana. And the Gemara says that now we're stepping into a major machlokas. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav Rabbi Meir. The author of our Mishnah, excluding knas in the case of a ketana, must be Rabbi Meir. The Sanya, we went to the Brisa, ketana bas yom echad. The ad shetavi shtei saros. Eish lamecher vein lo knas. This is all Rabbi Meir. What happens now? Rabbi Meir has what I call an inverse relationship. And he says the following. There's mecher, which is the father's rights to sell his daughter as an omavriya. And then there's knas, which means that in event of an ones, the father will collect 50 shekel kesef. According to Rabbi Meir, it's the opposite. If there's mecher, then there's no knas. If there's knas, there's no mecher. And the Shita Mekubetzes explains that Rabbi Meir is giving us an insight as to why there's no knas in the case of a ketana. And the answer is because yesh la mecher. He could sell her as a shivcha. Now, a shivcha doesn't have a knas. So if there's yesh la mecher, that means she's in a state of shivchus, or could potentially become a shivcha, and therefore there's no knas, because shivcha and knas are mutually exclusive. The ein lo knas ad shetovi shtei saros v'ad shetibag. Yesh lo knas, ein lo mecher. So we have both in both directions. If there's mecher, which means she's a ketana, then there's no knas. If there's no mecher, it means she's a nara, then there is knas. I'll just mention on the side, I don't want to get off on a tangent. The Tosfos Yontif has a whole different approach to Rabbi Meir. He says it's not because there's mecher, there's no knas, because there's knas, there's no mecher, but rather it's just a simon l'dova. It's just, these are the facts on the ground, and he formulates it in that way so we can remember it. So again, mecher applies when a father sells his ketana as a shivcha, his daughter is a ketana, and that precludes the possibility of knas. On the other hand, when there is knas, that means she's already a nara, she's 12 years old with simonim, then at that point there's no mecher. We're going to have an interesting sugya later. If he sells her as a ketana, the father sells his daughter as a ketana, what happens when she becomes a nara? Does she automatically go free? Shahai Rabbi Meir Omer, Kol Mokum Sheish Mecher, Ein Knas, Kol Mokum Sheish Knas, Ein Mecher. V'chachamim Omrim, Ketana Mibas Sholosh Shonim V'yom Echad, V'ad Shetipoger Yesh La Knas. He also agrees that the ceiling is bagus, but he's opening it up from the moment that she's 3 years old, because at that point she's real bia, and that bia will generate a chiyuv of 50 shekel kesef as an onus. So it comes out that according to Chachamim Shita, you have an overlap of both knas and mecher in the case of a ketana, just that you limit that overlap to her 3rd birthday, only when she becomes 3. Whereas mecher would apply from the moment that comes into this world. But from the age of 3 until the age of 12, we have an overlap, according to the Chacham, of both mecher and knas. And they're not mutually exclusive. But where are we up to now? Let's just figure this out. Having learned the machlok between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim about whether or not there's knas in the case of a ketana, Rabbi Yehuda says there is no knas. I'm sorry, I said Rabbi Yehuda, I meant to say Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says there's no knas because there's mecher. And the Chacham hold that even a ketana has knas. Now, our Mishnah says, Elu nara sheishnam, and we were medayik nara in ketana lo. That must be shitas Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara says, Ema. So now the Gemara is going to try to reinterpret the Mishnah and reject the diuk of nara in ketana lo, and reinterpret the Mishnah in such a way that it can include even a ketana, and therefore can reflect even the shitas chacham. And that's here on the top of Chav Tes Amud Beis. The Gemara says, Af knas b'makom mecher. So we're saying just 1 second. Let's just take a look at the Rashi on the top of Chav Tes Amud Beis for a second. Af knas b'makom mecher, u'mishum knas nokat bas sholosh. Right, because she has to be Ruya Labia. She's only Ruya Labia at the age of 3. Aval mecher mi bas yom echad, meaning as soon as she pops her head out of her mother's womb, the adjective shtei saras, and she becomes a vogeres. So let me just backtrack on one point that I made. It says in the Gemara, Om Rabbi Yehuda Marav Rabbi Meir. Our Mishnah, based on our diuk of Nara in Ketana Lo, reflects the shita of Rabbi Meir, Kol Mokum Sheyesh Mecher Ein Knas. The Gemara, when it says Knas in Mecher Lo, that was the Gemara's question on the Chachamim, right? Because the Chachamim mentioned that Ketana Mibash Shol Shom V'Yachar Yesh Lo Knas. And again, if we apply the diuk, it's going to be Yesh Lo Knas, but Ein Lo Mecher. That's not true according to the Chachamim, because the Chachamim, they don't have that exclusion that once she has Knas, she has no Mecher. And we're saying that the Knas starts with Bas Sholosh Yom V'Yecha. And we know there's Mecher in the case of Ketana, and therefore the Gemara says, Ema Af Knas B'Mokom Mecher. So when it says here in the Brisa, it says Chachamim Omrim Ketana mi Bashol Shon V'Yomecha V'Adsheti Boger Yesh Lo Knas. Sounds like there's no mecher. That's impossible because a Ketana, according to everybody, there's mecher. The answer is Ema Af Knas B'Moko Mecher. That the chiddush is that even though there's mecher, and therefore according to Rabbi Meir's logic, that bumps off the possibility of knas. No, there's going to be knas as well. And there's no stira between mecher and knas. They can perfectly overlap. So the Gemara asks for Hani, just one second.